All right. Hey, everybody. Time for another Inkarnate live stream. You know what we're doing today? We are doing blending textures. I'm excited for this. Blending textures is really, really fun, and I'm excited to show you how to do it. I don't really have a lot of announcements. There's not a lot going on, so without further ado, we'll just kind of jump right in. Again, we'll be showing you how to blend textures. That includes blending basics, just blending two swatches together, and how to blend in your stamps with your background textures or your textures as well. So that way you have the best of both worlds, because blending is actually much easier than you think. It's not as complex. Say hello to everybody. Welcome, Seraphim. Glad you're here. Hello. We're doing blending. I'm excited. You guys all ready to make a freaking mess? I am. I love making messes. And I equally like cleaning them up too. All right, let's do it. So blending is not as complex as you would think. And you know, there's a easy way to practice blending, and that is just to apply a swatch basically onto a canvas with whatever texture is below it. That's fine. I think this is set to FG, so I'll put it on. So we're going to show you one quick swatch. So I'm just going to go with one stroke like this. And what we're trying to make is like a grass patch, right? But you'll notice that the patch is kind of weird. There's not a lot of blending between this brown texture that you see right here. This edge right here, it's kind of, I don't know, it's not diffused. It seems like there's an obvious line there, right? And we want to break that up. That's what we want to do. How do we get this texture to blend with this texture? And it's actually not as complicated as you think. It's super easy, and there are a couple methods. So what we're trying to do is basically diffuse this line. And so there are a couple options. How do we get these two textures to blend? I'm going to bring the size down. I'm not going to worry about opacity right now. We'll address that later. But one way that you can get two textures to go well together is just to do these single dots like this. And what you're doing is diffusing the line to where it's harder to tell that there's a line there. You can see the difference here. On this side, it's a little bit more diffused. The line's not so obvious. If you look over on this side, this line, kind of straightforward. You can tell what it is. There's no transition between the two textures. So these little single dots are a great technique on how to make two textures blend together. And we'll also cover 3, 4 textures and things like that. But this is the first step in blending, is just once you have a blob of a texture, break up the edges of that blob and create a transition over to that next texture. And that's really the simplest way to go about it. I can't really think of an easier way. I think the fastest way is to use the edgy brush, and I'll show you how to use that as well. So I'll go back in here and kind of cover this back up. Don't need that anymore. Okay. Let's say that we want to use the edgy brush. Now the edgy brush works much differently than your circle brush with the halo on. Your edgy brush is going to show little cells that create like an edge shape. And there are a couple options with that. You can control the feature size, which just means how much the edge, how big those segments will be. So I'll give you a quick example. If I go like this and I set it just your basic standard default setting, watch what happens when I bring this down to 3. The edges aren't quite the same. And you can also remove the smooth function as well to get harder, more interesting edges. Give it a second here. We'll apply it here. Let me see here. Yeah, you can see the difference. So that's with the edgy brush. Now, what's really nice about the edgy brush is that you can also bring the opacity down. And when you're working with the edgy brush, I always recommend dropping the opacity down, because at 100%, as you can see, these really weird lines here. Now, something about opacity is that when you're doing a brush stroke, and it doesn't matter which brush you're using, if the opacity is at, let's say, 50%, let's say it's at 50, okay? And I do one stroke on the canvas like this, and then I do another stroke over it, it's going to be at 100% pretty much, because it's two 50s, right? A 50 and a 50 equals 100. I think it's because it's on a softness brush, you can actually do another stroke over it, I think. But what's nice about opacity is that you can start with a couple strokes first and it won't be very dominant, and then you can keep adding strokes as you go. Now this is a technique that's going to take you a few moments, but because you have to do multiple strokes, but in the end it kind of diffuses these edges with just a couple strokes like this, and it starts to break it up. And of course, just like with that circle brush, you can just do single clicks, because that's ultimately another way to break up those edges, right? So that's like the basics of blending, is you want to just break up the outer line, and single click brushes, single clicks allow you to break up that line and kind of create a transition with the texture below it. So that's blending basics 101. Is that simple? Does anyone have any questions about that? Let me know. I try to keep this as simple as possible. Blending is not as complex as you think, but it is time consuming, of course. Obviously, the more strokes you use on the canvas, the better the transitions will be. So it's a little bit of work, but that's the best way to do transitions. And that includes if you're wanting to do, like, I know that if you're working on a world map and you're trying to focus on a biome, right? Let's say that you have like a desert biome next to a some kind of like barren wasteland, dirt wasteland. I'm gonna go ahead and apply this texture on here, put it 100%, sorry. And say that you want to transition between a desert. I'll put in a few stamps as well, just to verify that that's exactly what we're using. 1 second, I'm gonna type in dunes. And it's top down, that's fine, we'll stick with this. But what we're trying to do is show the transition between, because I know when I'm working on a world map, sometimes it's hard to create a transition between biomes, right? You were like, well, how do I transition a desert with this, or a forest with a lake area or a plain? How do I make those transitions, right? That can be confusing. Hello, Catnip Fastens, welcome, glad you're here. Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating, right? When you're trying to make your desert blend in with your forest or whatever, right? So the way that I go about doing that is the method that I just used before with little dots and stuff, but also you want to create shapes that it's not just a line with dots, right? How is it that you create a proper transition where it shows less and less desert as it turns into something else? So like less and less desert before it hits a mountain and then a forest maybe, or how do I go from a forest to a wasteland? How is it that I create that transition? And I can show you how to do that. So normally what I do is I'll start by making once I put my stamps down, I put down my base texture that I want for my desert. And of course, I'm not just having a straight line. So there might be some really weird kind of odd shapes. Just make a couple blobs like this over here. So you have a couple blobs, and then you can work from those blobs and create the transition around those, just like I did before. We'll bring it down to 61 instead. I'll do some single clicks. I'm gonna make the brush a little bit bigger. 2, and I can do some of these single clicks like this, and the transition begins. You know, the reason why I do the large blobs is because it's nice to have these large blobs that transition into smaller blobs, and they get smaller and smaller, and that is how you transition over to a biome. At least that's how I do it. Because if you have just one giant blob and no little or large, medium-sized blobs around the space of your desert to whatever your next biome is, then it might look like kind of like a weird-looking jagged line. So instead, create little blobs and then little tiny blobs around those. And as you keep adding that, you'll see a transition start to happen, and that makes it easier. Now, also, this is when if you want to enlarge the desert space that transitions, you would use the same sand texture. What happens if you're not satisfied with that and you want to go back in and make more of the other one? So then you would go in with this texture, this brown one with the dirt on it, single click, and you'll notice that I'm moving inward now, removing it. And you can keep doing this to create more and more kind of transition as you go. Smaller brushes, even smaller, go to 6, even smaller, even smaller. So this is kind of the transition, how I like to do my blending. Now, I'm sure there are other methods that people have, and those work just fine. This is not the only way. With Inkarnate, it's such a versatile tool that there's more than one way to make things, and that's super nice. And I'm always open to suggestions. You know, I'm just one of many mappers, many cartographers in our community, And we have quite a few good cartographers, and I'm always learning from them, and I love that. So that is how you go about doing your transitions between biomes. And yet sometimes there might be like a river that separates a biome. You could do that too. So those are the blending techniques that I do for creating that. Now there's a little bit more to blending textures than just blending two textures, right? What happens if you also want to blend in stamps with your textures? Because sometimes it's kind of confusing and kind of frustrating how you want to go about blending in a stamp to make it fit with the texture beneath, right? And the most common one that I see actually on most maps is fantasy maps, and that's with mountains. So we'll quickly go over that. I'm going to go back and kind of transition this back over to here, put that back, and we're going to go over that real quick. Let me see if I can find the other one. Just kind of cleaning up my mess. Are there any questions so far? People have any questions? If they lost or anything, did that help to kind of explain things? I know it's kind of simplistic and maybe you were expecting more, but blending actually isn't really that complex. It's just, it seems overwhelming when you have like 12 biomes on your map, on your world map, and it's like, well, how do I get all these to blend correctly? Well, if you get overwhelmed with a blending challenge on a map, just blend one area at a time. Blend, yeah, perfect, absolutely, Dragon, Dreams, and Squirrels. Absolutely, yeah, it's just those little dots. It's kind of, I don't know what the proper art term for it is. I'm using diffuse, but I'm sure some people here would disagree with that. But you're breaking up, you're creating more transition between two textures. And that technique works. And if you, like I said, if you get discouraged on a larger map, then just go to one biome and just blend that one biome into another one. And then as you get better and better at it, you'll realize you'll become easier each time you do it. And you can also use stamps, by the way, as well to break up or to create transitions. So, but first, let's go ahead and make that mountain range, and I'll show you how I go about doing that. Not complex at all. We're gonna go in here, I'm gonna type in mountain. Real quick, we'll see what we want to pick. Let's just say you're using this one for now, and I'm gonna probably change my texture to, I always like to, just real quick, I always like to, when I start a map, I like to use dirt as my base texture, because what grows on dirt? Everything. Grass, plants, trees. Dirt is, you know, think Minecraft, right? Like you have that dirt layer, right? And so I always put dirt or a brown texture on all of my map space first, and then I can paint textures on top of that. Now, there are exceptions to that, like a desert and things like that, but usually dirt is where I start. Let's just start with dirt. We're getting dirty here. Stick with dirt for your first, the texture that you want to start on top, and then you can put all the other textures on top of that. Clearly, your ocean, your base texture for your ocean is going to be a blue or an ocean green, sea color, whatever it is your preferences is. But it's also a great start, and that's particularly if you're starting with Fantasy World or Fantasy Regional. Obviously, if you're starting with a parchment map, you can stylize and use whatever color or texture that you want. That's the beauty of parchment, is you can do whatever you want with it. I'm going to quickly save this because I've made quite a few changes. And I'm going to show you again how to blend in mountains, because that's the most basic one. Mountains are basically the first thing that I put on a map, a world map or regional map, because it's the largest thing, right? And it acts as something that you can scale other things against. Buildings, trees. Obviously, mountains are so massive that a tree would be pretty much indistinguishable. You wouldn't even be able to see it on a map. That's why you see those forests that look like a blanket instead of a series of individual trees. So, but it's, again, a map is a representation, so you don't have to worry about that. You can take things out of scale for stylizing things. It's up to you. Oh, first time chat. Hey, Bonsai Bella, welcome. So glad you're here. Oh, you got to catch one. Awesome. Yeah, we're doing blending. And blending is so much fun. So I've ranted on long enough. Let's go ahead and put on those mountains, and I'll show you how to blend them in. I'm going to put them over here. I think this texture actually already is built for this. So that actually kind of works out kind of nice. But let's say that your texture, that wasn't the right texture. We move it over to here. It's a different one, a little bit flatter. how would I blend these in? Well, I think with the fantasy regional style, and this is really nice to know, both fantasy regional and other styles have specific textures that are meant to work with certain hills and mountains and certain styles. So if I go over to the textures, and I'm just going to deselect all and go to Fantasy Regional HD, there is this texture right here, grass brown, and I think this texture was specifically made to match with these mountains. So that's why I would try to use those. Let's go with the edgy brush. I'm going to drop the opacity down. And we'll start with maybe the edgy brush just to see how it looks. I'm going to bring down that. Okay, looks good. I'm going to zoom in. So we're going to take this edgy brush like this. It seems a little light, and let's bring the size up and the opacity. We're going to try to blend in these mountains, whatever, with this brown texture here. First, you're going to start with just a regular blob, just like we did with making a biome, right? You have that blob basic texture that's going to be underneath. So there's your blob done. Once you're done with the blob, you can go in with single clicks and go underneath and make sure the texture is at 100% underneath where the mountains directly connect with the ground, right? Now, once you've done that, of course, you'll step out and begin doing the single clicks again, because you're trying to blend in this with the base texture that you have. And don't be afraid to go in and just make some larger sections. Maybe larger sections of blobs here, one here like this, adding a little section. And these little sections, again, make it so where it doesn't just look like a large blob. You have little tiny ones to break up the large ones, tiny, tiny ones to break up the medium-sized ones. I swear I'm gonna just be so annoying, keep telling you this. But that is what I definitely recommend with blending. That is how I blend all of my stamps. So if I have a green mountain, then I do that. If I have a tree, then I make sure to put something underneath the tree. And that's as simple as that. With this, there are all kinds of different techniques for blending. Let's cover trees real quick. And something I like to do with all my trees, and I even do this with buildings. Let me look for a tree 1 second. We will go over this. Let's deselect everything. And just go to Fantasy Regional HD. 1 second, we'll grab it up. Here we go. All right, I'm going to put a bunch of trees together like this. Okay, and one thing I can't stand about Fantasy Regional HD is the baked-in shadows. But one thing that I like to do with trees, and that includes fantasy battle maps, that includes using any of the battle maps, any of the world styles. This is something I always do underneath my trees. So there's something called duff. And duff is when all the bark, branches, leaves, they all fall off the tree and they land on the ground and then they decompose, right? And that layer is called duff. And if you've ever worked in like a trail working crew, that's what they call it, duff. And all the time we're removing duff because it's very, very flammable, right? Because it's old, it's dry, and it's very flammable. So duff is the stuff that falls off a tree. So whenever I make a set of trees, I always like to put a little bit of duff underneath it. So that means taking a darker texture, whatever that may be. Let's just say I want to use this texture right here. Filters, I'm going to drop the brightness down to where it's a little bit darker. And I like to put a little bit of darker texture underneath my trees. And that to me kind of represents duff, and it's darker. It's also going to help those trees pop out more. You'll see that these trees are a lot brighter, the foliage up top, and you'll see down here it's a lot darker. And that is called, you're using basically contrast to make something pop out more. And also it helps to blend in the stamp better. Of course, it blends way better, at least in my opinion. Also, again, if you're going to do that, you can always do those single click trick as well, like this. So that way, at least it blends better instead of you having this strange brown blob underneath. And again, the smaller you go, smaller and smaller you go, the more it'll blend. So if your blending looks a little off, like these blobs are too big, drop down your size and then just go over it with smaller ones. And the more and more you go through that transition, the more and more it's going to blend. Really, it's that simple. It's not that complex. Super easy stuff. Any questions so far? We're moving rather quickly. If anyone has specific questions about blending, don't be afraid to ask. And at the beginning, I forgot to mention that Cheryl, that's SL Mumby, will be modding the stream. Apologies, Cheryl, for not mentioning you earlier. We have a great mod, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask. If people have any questions about specific things that they struggle with blending, feel free to ask, and maybe we can even do an exercise with that. Oh, yeah, please ask your questions. I'd love the demo stuff. I love when people ask me to do something on stream. That's so much fun. We could go over a project together and try to figure it out. So if you have any questions about blending, let me know. If there's no questions, we'll move to the next part, and we're going to talk about blending water. That means oceans, stuff like that, because I know sometimes ocean painting can be kind of painful. Like, how is it that I blend the ocean to where there's a deep end and a shallow end? How is it that I go about doing that? And so that's more than just texturing. That's also blending, because there'll be some blending in that. So if there's no questions, we'll move on to ocean. All right, well, I'm not seeing any questions quite yet, so I'm just going to jump in and make some ocean water, and we're going to go over a technique on how to show how to do the deep end, the shallow end on your shoreline, all that stuff. So we'll cover all of that. I'm going to go ahead and apply my textures here, and I'll make a quick little landmass. I'm not sure how that's going to work. Oops. All right, we'll place it over. Oops, I'm at 58%. That's not going to work. There we go. And I'll quickly do the subtract, but I think the whole map is actually in the FG layer. So I'll just make a small little island right here like this with the edgy brush. 1 second here, and we'll get over this. There we go. I'll go over here. I'm just going to make a little kind of a little fantasy little island here or something. Put some more land over here as well. All right. Now we might have to play with blend modes a little bit with the mask tool. So I'll turn off much of these masks. I probably can turn everything off, really, but I'll leave the stroke on since it's the most common one used. But that stroke is ridiculously thick, so I'm going to bring it down quite a bit. And then we'll go over kind of how to blend our ocean textures. Okay, I'm going to use white instead as well, just to kind of represent like waves, shoreline with white. There we go. All right. Okay, and I can still bring down this quite a bit. Let's go down to something quite a bit smaller. And also, I think I need to save. I'm at 350 changes. People are like, but you have so many changes. Yes, it's so true. I am. I'm so naughty. So naughty. All right, sweet. We're going to give it a moment to save, and then we're going to go over ocean blending. And ocean blending is relatively the same as blending on land, but it's a bit different. Like if you want to represent a darker part of your ocean, which I'm sure you've already suspected, you're obviously gonna or a deeper end of your ocean, you're gonna want to paint your water a little bit darker, right? Because the deeper it is, the less light can go through. So the deeper the water is, the darker it's going to be. The shallower it is, the lighter it will be. Remember, light can only travel, those particles on a wave can only go so far down before it's so far down that not enough light can filter down. So it's really not that complex. It's really that simple. The deepest parts are going to be a lot darker. And there's a lot of different ways that you can paint your oceans. You can just play with the same texture that you have as your ocean by just making it lighter or darker. Or if you want, you don't have to use that same texture. You can go in and just take a darker texture, like this dark one here. And it's so dark, you might want to consider dropping down your opacity quite a bit because it is so dark. And really, it's really this as simple as this. What you want to do is don't in any way try to hit the edge like this with your dark texture, because obviously, as you're getting closer to shore, the water is getting shallower. So it's not going to be dark like you would expect the deep end to be. This is Adult Swim, folks. We're in the deep end, okay? That's what we're doing. All right? And you're going to only start away from the land like this, and just paint that whole section like this with just one stroke. This is your first one. Fill in that whole section, and then you can go in and do it again a little bit farther away, as you would expect, because the farther away from land, the deeper the water gets, right? And then you can go in a little bit deeper in this corner or this corner here. So remember, the darker it is, the deeper the ocean is. Let's move in over to here. I want to do the same thing. Make sure that I don't get too close to shore, of course, because it's going to be deep and shallow, but shallow by the shore. And that's really as simple as it gets. Now then comes something that's a little bit different from textures, but it's good to mention it, and that is, if you're working on land masses, how do you create even further transition between the land mass itself and the water? And of course, you're probably going to want to end up using your mask effects. Now, for this one, I've accidentally reversed it. So this is actually the BG. So this would technically be the inner shadow, I believe, and not the outer shadow. But if you were using the FG to be the land, it would be outer shadow. So kind of a boo-boo on my part. But really, the outer shadow, if your land is the FG, you're going to use like a white texture, and you can drop the opacity, so you can bring it out and then drop the opacity. You drop it down quite a bit because it's so bright. Or you can go with a different color. So we already have this blue right here. So maybe we want to choose a different blue, one that's probably lighter. So let's go with one that's got maybe right about there. Oh, let's make it a little bit more blue so we can see it. And then I'm just going to drop the opacity down quite a bit. There we go. I'm also going to bring the stroke down. I don't want to go too far into mask settings. I think it would be great to actually do a stream on how to use mask settings. That'd be pretty sick. But using mask settings with the outer shadow is the best way to go about it. Or if you don't feel there's enough transition between them, you can go in with that light texture again and line around here. But I don't feel like you really should have to do that. But sometimes the mask effects might not be enough for you and you want to show more transition. And you can totally do that by just making sure it's set to the right layer and just go over your whole edge like this. And you can kind of create additional transition if you want. That's up to you. You don't have to. And you can also do single clicks as well if you want to have more transition. I don't recommend using an edgy brush when doing painting water. Honestly, I don't think it works that well. I'll show it to you so you can just see it. But I kind of find that the edgy brush, in my opinion, doesn't work that great. I mean, it doesn't mean you can't use it, because you totally can. That's up to you. But I actually prefer to use a soft brush for my edges, and that's just personal preference. But maybe that would work for you. Maybe you prefer that instead. And that's totally okay. I just think that the edges are kind of hard, and it doesn't really work the same, in my opinion. I prefer prefer the soft brush. You can see here, kind of looks more like land. But if I go back over the whole thing again with a soft brush, it looks a little bit better, in my opinion. So I'll go back over it here, set to FG, go over it. There's water on top of water. Maybe I should paint that something else, like maybe a green or something. Let's set it to BG, and that way I have at least some green land here. There we go. Okay, see all this edgy brush? It just doesn't look good. So I'll go back over the whole thing, and we'll do that again. Give me 1 second. We'll go over to FG, and we'll press enter. There we go. You can take that brush, take that circle brush, make sure the softness is all the way up. We'll drop the opacity down. And again, soft brush just works better, in my opinion. Go in, It's just a bit softer. It works a little bit better. The edgy brush just works better for land, in my opinion. Just me. It might work for other people. Go in, little small brush clicks like we did before with water, with the land. Now we're doing it with water. So that's how you would go about doing your ocean painting. Just remember, darker it is deeper. Lighter means shallower. Okay? Any questions about that? Anything that you want me to specifically showcase? How to blend in specific textures that you have a hard time with? Maybe you struggle with lava. Maybe you struggle with making a pile of goo. Maybe you struggle with how to blend your shoreline against your land to make it look like there's waves on the land. Like there's all these different type of things. So if you have any questions, be specific. I'm here to help. If not, this will be an extremely short stream. Blending isn't as complex as you thought, was it? It's much easier than you think. Super nice, right? When it's not as complex. Really, really helpful. It's really just as simple as that. Just trying to diffuse or break up the line, or break up the textures that you're using. It's really that simple. And even when you apply multiple textures. Let's see, we got some questions here. Oh, yay, questions. Is that page template you're using with 8 different sections available anywhere for me to clone and edit? You know, I think actually I can just do that. Right after the stream, I'll make sure to do that. But I'll show you how I made it if you also want to know too, okay? So what I did is I just took the grid and here, let me actually go out of this and I'll show you how I did this. I did this in the last stream, but I'm glad that you asked because this is actually a good question. Because people have asked me this and they're like, how the heck do you do this? Perfect. I'm about to show you. Bonsai Bella. Perfect. Oh, I'm so glad someone asked a question. I love it. All right, so let's open up a map and I'm going to show you how I go about making these panels. I'm sure like one of the things that you've noticed that you right away when you're using the grid tool is that the grid is actually limited on how big it can get. The grid can get quite small. Clearly, the grid can get quite small. If I scale this up, the grid gets quite small, right? But when you're doing the grid with size, trying to get big, it doesn't work so well. Look carefully here. You see, it's not that big, and the offset is off a little bit down here as well at the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and apply a flat color, so that way these don't kind of get in the way, because it's super hard to see the grid. So I'll just put a flat color on it, so that way you can see it. Okay, so now you can see the grid. Boom, it's in your face. That's really yellow. So once you've done that, you've made the grid, you decide, well, how many sections do I want in my grid? Do I want 3? Do I want 5 by 5? Do I want 3 by 3? Do I want 4 by 2? Right? Okay, so this is not complex. Go to Resize tool, resize the map, and all you have to do is just resize right over where your grid section is. That's it. Right there. See how I've covered the amount of grid that I want? Now I'm going to press confirm. Now what will likely happen is I'll have to save my map. I'll just put delete me, because whenever I do this, I always delete the original. I don't need it. Or you can keep an original that has the grid so that you can always base off of it. So this is as simple as it gets. Do you do these kinds of streams regularly? I'm going to buy Inkarnate real soon and can't wait to learn more often. I will have many questions. Oh, yeah, heck yeah, we do streams. Probably about 3 times a week, sometimes 2 times a week, just depends. Monday, Wednesday, Friday seems to be the pattern. So don't miss out, my friend. Nymphadora, 338. Yeah, absolutely. We're here all the freaking time. Absolutely. Ask as many questions as you want. And hey, if you haven't, join our Discord server, because our Discord server is amazing. Everyone is so nice. It is such a safe place, and everyone is so helpful. Everyone will be very kind and easy on your work. Everyone is always trying to help people improve. Yes, absolutely join the Discord. All right, so we had a question here. We have, with the grid. Yep, that's it. That's how you make a grid. And what's really nice is that it keeps the grid, too, at the size that you want. You see, it's not little tiny grid, because you've resized the aspect ratio. And so the grid will still be rather large, like the way that we have it here. So that's super nice. And I use this all the time when I'm doing a demo, trying to explain things. So now you know how to do it, and you don't have to worry about having to clone and edit it. Now you know how to do it yourself, because it's a great trick. I can tell you right now, it works absolutely fantastic. Okay, well, I'll go back to doing more blending. If there's any questions, feel free to ask me. If not, this will be a pretty short stream, and I don't mind. Let's go ahead and cover this. Even if your question isn't concerning, doesn't concern blending, that's okay. If you have other questions, feel free to ask. Don't be shy. It's just while we're here, you might as well ask them, right? Ooh, great. Yes, awesome. I love that my tips are helpful. I love hearing that. Yeah, ask any question. It doesn't have to be about blending. So feel free to ask. We are here to help. You might as well ask us while we're here, right? And if there is no questions, then maybe I'll do a slight demo on a little bit on showing you the last section, which is alpha textures. Okay, yeah, let's go with alpha textures. So I want to talk about how this is continuing on blending with stamps. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to show you how to continue to blend stamps with textures. So one thing that I notice is that people might struggle with, and some people have told me about this, is how do I get my cliffs to blend properly? Like, how do I blend cliffs in with my ground texture? This question, actually, I get asked this quite a bit. So how do I go about doing that? So let's say that you want to make a cliff face. Let's just put one right here. We'll make it an easy one. Make it nice and simple. Nothing complex. And you see right away that there's an issue, right? I've added cliffs, but what about the section of the cliff right here? You notice that there's not much going on right here. The transition up in this section right here. You're like, wait a minute. Well, that's not going to work, right? Obviously, there's not going to be a grass growing and then right on top of that, there should be some kind of blending between this section right here, both going this way and going this way, right? So we have to talk about blending and the different kind of transitions that we can cover. Can you do a demo of blending stone, path, ground into grass? Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's finish doing this one, and I'll actually make a stone path looping around this kind of structure right here. Perfect. That's a great question, Bonsai Bella. Thank you very much, by the way. Appreciate it. Okay, let's go ahead and just grab this. So the first step when you're blending basically a cliff is you're going to want to pick a stone texture. You already have your grass. Perfect. But you need to pick a stone texture. Now, that's up to you what you want to pick. Me personally, I always choose this stone wall one right here because it doesn't have any ridiculously repeating artifacts like the dungeon texture where you'll see all the cobbles in it. But with this stone wall texture, there isn't those kind of artifacts that are going to maybe clash against the stamp, right? Now, what I like to do first is just apply it right over like this first. Just apply it just to see how it looks. And you'll notice that there is some green lining over the edge of it. Now, my background is actually the BG and not the FG. So these stamps have what's called a clipping mask, just in case you're wondering. If you open it up, click it, open this, and then click that, you'll notice that it goes away. Now, I personally, depending on what I'm working on, I'll turn the clipping mask on and off. It's up to you how you want to go about it. But you can paint it by just painting FG layer. So watch what happens when I paint FG layer. You see it's not going anywhere but on the stamp itself because there is a clipping mask on it. A clipping mask registers whatever texture is on the FG layer. Okay? Hey, first time chat. D4 welcome. Hey, yeah, absolutely. You can bring it to the background. Absolutely. I totally agree. So now once you've done that, of course, you're going to want to apply your texture. So I'll just apply this to the BG because that's where this is at. I'm just going to cover the whole thing with just a blob. You don't have to worry about doing anything else. Just make a blob first. That's your first step. After you've made the blob, you already know what to do from here. Now you just have to break up those edges with a smaller brush. That's it. So just break it up like this. And we'll go the other way too. We're going to diminish it. First, we're going to have it go out a little bit away from the cliff, as you would expect. You'd expect dust, rubble, erosion, right? This wouldn't be pure grass along this edge right here because of erosion. Small rocks earthquakes, weather, rain, flood, wind, all of those things along that edge, you'd see some debris at the base. So have a little bit of this stone texture below, okay? And yes, it's at 100%, but you can break that up, and we'll get to that. So always remember, when you're making your cliffs, put a little bit of erosion at the base of the cliff, so that way it looks a little bit more natural. Because cliff basins, cliffs at the edge of cliffs, there's stone, there's rock, lots of erosion, okay? So you've done that first, right? Oopsie, that is the path tool. So we've done that first, added our little stuff into here. Now you can go back inward towards the thing. You can kind of just do little clicks. Again, you're creating more transition. Let's go with a higher opacity. Let's go with 50. There we go, much better. Now I can go in, kind of single click here. Okay. Now that you've done that step, you've kind of done the blending at the base. Now you want to also make a little bit more blending here. Now you'll notice along the cliff edge right here and on the inside, or shall we say on top, okay? This edge right here. You'll notice that there is no line work going out like this to help to kind of represent a little bit more, to show more erosion, to show more character, right? And so instead you have this very flat edge, and there's not much transition at all. So we're going to use alpha textures. Alpha textures are an absolute godsend. Yes, I absolutely use a stylus and I use my mouse, but I want to give you a heads up. If you use a stylus, I don't use it for every single thing that I'm doing. I actually use the mouse about 90% of the time because it's actually a pain in the rear to try to place stamps, to place single stamps with a pen. It's actually easier to do most of your navigating in the editor with your mouse. If you're going to use the pen, I use the pen for texturing, brushing things, path tool to make sure I have a nice curve when I'm making roads, things like that. Then I use my stylus. But if you don't have a stylus, if you don't have, and you're just using a mouse and you don't know how to make nice curved lines, it's all about practice. It's all about making practice. I'll show you real quick. So this is when I'm using my mouse, when I'm using my stylus, this is what it looks like. And then when I try to use my mouse, it's a little bit harder. The trick is just to go a little bit slower. Because if you go fast, you might make a mistake. So I go slow in my brush strokes with a mouse. But I don't really use a mouse anymore. But if you do use your mouse and you're blending, then I definitely recommend just taking it a little bit slower. Don't go so fast with your strokes, unless that works for you. Okay, so now we're going to apply a alpha texture. Now, if you don't know what an alpha texture is, alpha just means transparency. It doesn't mean, ooh, ooh, big dog of the pack. Ooh. No, that's not what alpha means with your texture, okay? Alpha literally means that it supports transparency. And just a little caveat here, if you want to import your own texture that has a transparency on it, make sure that it's a PNG file. JPEG, JPG, JPEG, the JPEGs, those things will not support alpha channels, which is transparency. So just always remember, if you want to create your own texture and it has a transparency in it, save that file as a PNG so that it will support that alpha channel, okay? Now, when you look at cracked ground, when I apply it, you'll notice that it's showing only the cracked part. There's no texture beneath that. That's what's the alpha or the transparency, okay? So alpha transparencies might put some artifacts on the canvas, but it will retain whatever texture is beneath it, okay? So factor that in when you're ever thinking about it. But the plants under the cliff seem under the gray texture like the rubble is on the ground and not on the plants, right? Yeah, absolutely, of course. We can add a bunch of stamps to change that up, like a bunch of debris and rock, because you'll notice that there's not much of a transition between the stamp and the ground below. So you would definitely throw in rocks, dirt, throw in some, maybe a fallen tree, a landslide, rubble, dirt, things like that. And we'll get to that. That's not the same as blending, but we'll go over that. So That's a great question, by the way, Nymphadora. Great question. I'm going to go ahead and show you what I like to do with my cracked ground alpha texture. Works wonders with cliffs. So I'm going to go first into my advanced settings placement. I'm going to change the size to make sure that it's not massive like this, and make sure that it's not tiny like this to where I can't really see the artifacts, and so it's not repetitive. Because the smaller that you make a texture, just know that it's going to be more repetitious. Okay, always remember that. So what I want is to show enough cracks in the ground to where I'm going to basically be extending the line work of the cliffs. So I'm going to change the size to what I want. I'm probably going to rotate it as well so that I can maximize how much of that cracked ground is actually closest to the cliff edge. Now I'm going to go with my brush. 100% is fine, but you can bring it down if you want. And I'm going to apply this cracked ground right along this edge. And what I'm trying to do is create an illusion of, one, extending the line work of the cliffs, one, and two, it creates a transition between the cliff and the texture, and three, it also makes it look like there's erosion going on, as you would expect. You would expect cracked ground. You would expect erosion to be taking place, right? So that's what I like to use. Alpha textures just, they work absolutely beautiful with the stamp. So I'll quickly go ahead. I think Nymphadora had mentioned something about rubble, so let's go ahead and fix that. So with rubble, I'm going to go ahead and just type in rocks, and a whole bunch of rocks are probably going to pop up. These small ones work fine. And I'd like to place a couple on the ground. And whenever you're working with stones, adding a lot of a particular thing, let's say that you're adding a lot of, let's say you're adding a lot of rocks, you're adding a lot of plants, you're adding a lot of trees, then this is my recommendation to you. And I'm going to be like a broken record. I've said this in every stream, but you start with larger stones first, just like with texturing, you start with the large blob first, and then medium-sized blobs, and then small blobs, right? You're using that to create a transition. Same thing when you're doing multiple rocks, plants. You throw down a bunch of big ones first. This is going to be basically rubble that's fallen off the cliff. So these are parts of the cliff, basically, that have fallen off. And we'll just put them in some strategic places. Let's just say there was a landslide here in the past, or some flooding from rain caused it to fall off. Ah, yes, well, I love a good blob as well. Good blobby morning to you. We're getting blobby in here. So now that you've made large ones, actually, we can go even bigger than that, actually. I think we can go with a little bit larger. Now, once you've done your large ones, then you can move on to something smaller, right? So then go ahead and scale your stones down to make them quite a bit smaller, because what happens is that if you're having a landslide or erosion, it's not going to just be just a couple rocks. All the erosion I've seen in my driving, experiencing, and traveling is large chunks of rock will fall onto the ground. Then those large chunks will crack and break and make even smaller chunks. And then those chunks will break and collapse into even smaller chunks. So when it comes to debris, when it comes to landslides, you're going to have actually quite a bit. And since this is set to this is in the advanced setting. Go to placement, and you'll see it set to auto. I think this stamp is a stamp set, and you can set it to where it will just drag and hold it. So that's absolutely important. So I'm just going to drag and hold and just put a whole bunch of them here like this all over the place. Whole bunch. And you can even put a bunch lining along the edge like this, as you would expect, right? Because your edge is going to have erosion. So now you have that nice erosion edge. Now our blending is not done. There's more to it too, right? Some of the rocks, you might expect maybe some rock texture on the ground as well. And I don't mean just this gray texture without a lot of artifacts. I mean literal stone texture with artifacts in it. So the next step is you can go in and you can use, I believe there's a rock. Let me just check a rock texture. There's a couple of them. There's this lava rocks and this rock. And it's up to you which one that you want to use. It doesn't really matter. We'll just go with this one. Again, you're going to want to scale it properly. That looks about fine. And remember, it's an alpha. I'm going to drop the softness down, or bring the softness up and drop the opacity and bring the size up. And then from there, you can go underneath all of this and just put in, paint the rest, because you don't want to have to do every single rock with a stamp, right? That'll drive you insane. So to show the majority of the rock, use an alpha rock texture. That works absolutely perfect. So that way you don't have to go in and 2,000 rocks later, 3 million rocks later. Oh my gosh, my computer's freezing, right? So that's going to help, is doing that. Okay, so now you have all that rock, and it looks like there's some nice transition there. So you got there, and you can even put some rocks up on top too as well if you want larger ones. You can even take cliffs and make them look like they're branching off, so to add a second layer. This is a little bit different from regular blending, but I'll show you a cool trick that I like to do when I'm making multiple ledges. Normally you wouldn't just see a flat cliff ledge and then nothing else. You'd expect a little bit something more going on, right? So a really nice trick is to grab that same stamp set, make sure it's a layer above. You want this cliff to be on top. You see how it's on top? Like that. Place it strategically, line it up against let's say right here, okay? And what you're doing is you've created an illusion of another ledge, right? Let me draw it again. I'll put another one right here. Let's do this one. Like this. Oh, no. Let's get some curve in there. There we go. Let's do another one right here like this. And we're going to create multiple layers. There we go. So now you have multiple layers, so it looks like it's not just one flat, like mesa top. You would expect, there's a lot of curves, there's a lot of layers, and there's just so much going on in nature. It's not as simple as just, here's a flat mesa top in the middle of nowhere. I mean, that happens, obviously, but you know, if you want to give yourself a little bit more depth, you want to create a little bit more to it, this is the way to go about it. So I'm going to go ahead and go over this. Make sure that I go over this with the FG. There we go. Oh, thank you so much, Trap Lord Koala. Awesome. Glad that you are here. Yeah, I mean, that's really, it's the same technique, blending stamps to blend in. Same concept, large blob. Same thing if you were doing, let's say that you wanted to make let me see here. Let me grab a bunch of ferns, and I'm going to do more. We'll continue doing more blending. Let's say that I wanted to make a cluster of ferns, right? Oh, wait, there's a cliff here. Do we have some light work, like there is a sun or there'll be shadowing on the cliff? Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great idea. So, slightly off topic, but not entirely. Let's talk about shadows real quick. Couple ways to do shadows. Hey, Lily Rose, welcome. Hey, I'm so glad you're here. A couple ways to go about shadows is two. One, you can just use a flat color black, and you can drop the opacity down and make sure that the softness is all the way up. That's one step. You can paint it. That's entirely up to you if you want to use black. Just know that after a certain number of strokes with black, what will happen is that it will eventually turn solid black after doing a certain number of strokes, okay? So just factor that in when you're doing it. When you're using solid black, you'll lose all the information. That means all the texture below. So if you're gonna use flat black, just make sure the opacity is low enough to where you won't lose any of the information. That means the texturing on the ground, because that's what will end up happening. I'm gonna go through the history and just restore. So that's one way. Now there is other techniques. You can use that same gray texture that we've used to represent the top. You can take that same texture and just drop the brightness down quite a bit. And this way you won't lose any of the information in the texture. So you'll still have the artifacts. You can see that the artifacts are there. I'm going to bring up the opacity quite a bit. 59, maybe 49 should be fine. And when you're doing light, when you're doing shadows, of course, the first step is designating a light source, right? And that's going to be your first step. So we'll have to figure out what that is. First, we're going to do what's called ambient occlusion. And I've said this in every stream. Ambient occlusion is just where the ground, a wall, a cliff, meets the ground, and there's a shadow where the two connect, even when the sun is shining on there. And that ambient occlusion is used to create depth, okay? So watch what happens when I apply a dark texture underneath on the along the edge of this. You'll notice right away that that edge pops out. The light highlights inside of this stamp are clashing in contrast to this dark shadow underneath, okay? That is how you create depth. That's how you make your walls pop out. And the more ambient occlusion, the more shadow that you have, that means the deeper it's going to be. So if I take this, now if I add a nice hard shadow underneath this ledge right here, you'll notice that it got even more deeper, even more contrast, making it even feeling like it's even higher up. And you can even go in and bring that edge out. Bring that edge all the way out like that. And you can continue on going through and refining the shadow as you see fit. Just keep refining until you have the shadow the way that you want it. So it's really how you make something pop out, okay? And that's something that you should factor in as well. When you're making a building and you have walls, make sure the walls are somewhat light enough to where that dark shadow that you're using for your ambient occlusion will work in contrast to your wall. So I'll give you an example. So if I drop the brightness of this stamp like this, it kind of somewhat loses. Well, actually, I kind of like that. That's actually quite nice. Actually, I kind of like that. That's new. I just did something. I wanted to show you a mistake, but no, actually, I kind of like dropping that. That's kind of nice. That edge looks kind of cool. So let's decide that real quick where the light source is, and before I do anything else, so I'll go back to normal right here like this. And first, we're going to designate a light source, and the way that I go about doing that is I just pick the path tool and then make the direction wherever the light's coming from. Now, if you really want to see some nice shadows, obviously, you're not going to have the light source going down that way, right? You want to show the shadows of the mountain. You want to show that there's depth. The way to do that is to have the light probably going this way. And we've already kind of done that already. When you look over here, some of that shadow is already there. So I've kind of already established it. So now I know where my direction of my light source is, and I can go in and start applying as I see fit where I want to add that shadow. And you can start with the farther out this dark part goes, that means the deeper or the more depth that there is. So I'll go in here, make sure I get a nice hard line, hard edge here. Okay, and I'll do the same thing right here along this edge. And I will talk about how to blend in stamps to make it look like there is a shadow, or that the stamps are darker. And this is something that I try to factor in, kind of a pain, and I'll show you how to go about it. 1 second. Let's just get this edge in here. There we go. We'll get this nice hard edge in here. There we go. So you have some depth right there. Don't forget that large ambient occlusion step right here. Make it nice and dark. There we go. Now you have some ambient occlusion. And since we just discovered this, let's go ahead and drop the brightness down just a little bit, because we're going to show that this is higher up than this. So the shadow is casting. So we'll have this be a little bit darker because it's even farther down. I might even want to consider making this a little bit darker as well. I'm going to make sure the transition is right. There we go. So now what's after that is that we've noticed that some of my stones right here are quite bright. That doesn't make any sense, right? It's in the shadow. So I need to fix that. First, what I should do is select all my cliffs, and I'm going to group them right away. So this way, they're a single group, and I'm going to lock it immediately. Just go right over to that hamburger menu and go to lock. Now when I go to try to select these rocks, I won't accidentally select my cliffs, because that's a pain in the buns, let me tell you. So now from here, you're going to want to take every single rock that's in your shadows, and of course, as you would expect, drop the brightness down, right? Because it's in the shadow. It doesn't make any sense to have these rocks kind of be in, to be kind of light. They're in the shadow of this mountain or cliffside. So we're going to drop the brightness down so that way they really, really help. Oh no, Lily Rose, you haven't found time. Oh no, we miss your work. Yeah, so any stamp that's in the shadow of the mountain, just go over, or in the shadow, just make sure that you select it, of course, and just drop the brightness to match around relatively the same value or brightness or darkness as the shadow, right? Obviously, you're not going to take a rock like this and you're going to make it so dark that it's darker than the shadow, right? Because then it looks out of place, right? So you want to make sure that it's around the same value, the same kind of tone or brightness or darkness as the shadow itself. So always make sure to select some and then add your rocks. Now, if it's easier for you, what you can do is don't do all the debris first. Make all the cliff stuff first, then put down and do your shadows, and then you can just automatically apply rocks that are already darker to the shadows if that's easier for you, instead of going back and then selecting some that are in the shadow and making them dark. So it's up to you which method that you want to go about it. But really, this is the easiest way. I think there were some other questions people had, and we're going to go over that. What question was that? 1 second while I go over. Somebody had a question for me. Who was it? Oh, yes, absolutely. Favorite your textures. Oh, my gosh. Yes. I cannot say this enough. Whenever you are intending to use a texture many, many times in a map, and you intend to use it and you've done some editing, whether you've changed the size of it, you've changed the rotation, you've changed the offset, whatever. If you intend to use that texture again, immediately click Save to Favorites and then run over your favorites. Because if you don't do that, after a certain number of textures shows up in the recently used, those textures will start to go away. The ones that were farther back that you used, okay? And then you're forced to go back into the catalog, reselect the texture, do all the settings again. Don't do that. If ever, always remember, if you're changing the default settings on a texture that you intend to use, favorite it. That way you don't have to do those settings all over again. And believe me, I have done that many, many times. It's not fun. It's not fun. And definitely label your groups, by the way. If you don't know how to do that, don't worry, we'll show you how to do that. It's not complex. We'll go over, look for that group. There's the groups right there. Hamburger menu, rename, or go right over to here, see that little pencil, and rename it. Call it rocks. That's it. And labeling is, if you're making a map that doesn't have a lot of groups on it, don't worry about it. It's not your problem, okay? But if you're making a map with 50 groups on it, oh my gosh. If you don't label everything, label all those groups, it's going to take a little while. You'll end up going through a long list of groups, clicking each individual one to see the bounding box, to see where it is. So always remember to do that, okay? Label first. If you got 30 groups, label them all. Am I guilty of not doing this? Absolutely. All the time I forget to do this. I get so caught up in my process, I absolutely forget to do it. Beatrix Ray is one of our great cartographers, and they always, every time I open up one of their maps, it's just like, what the heck? Everything's labeled, everything's locked, it's so beautiful. I wish I had that kind of constitution. Joy, and after I'm done with the map, I have to go through the favorites and delete, or I'll end up with 100 favorites. Oh, absolutely. I have done that before. I'm like, wait a minute. I have like 80 favorites, because I don't think the favorites work by one map. So if you go onto a map and you have favorites saved, it's not going to be just on that map. It's going to save your favorites from every single map. And so your favorite section can get quite large. So yes, you will have to go back and probably delete some of your favorites. It's not hard. You see that little X icon there, and it says remove. Just click that. Boom. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. All gone now. Okay? So just kind of keep in mind to always, keep your situation tidy. Don't go down the route. Go down my route and screw that up. Okay? I am not tidy at all. I am a mess. Anyone else have some questions that they have, and we can kind of go over that? I can't think of anything else. We've gone over the various blending techniques. We've gone over how to blend in stamps. If you've got questions, don't be shy. Ask away, my friends. Ask away. All right. I don't think I see any questions. At least not yet. I'll wait. I know there's a little bit of a delay. We've been here for an hour. I am doing one of my favorite streams is going to be actually coming up next week on the 18th. That's a Monday. It's going to be a map makeover. Hey, we're going to make someone's maps. Woo! I'm excited about that. How to use a clipping asset to blend? Oh my God, that's a great question. That is a great question. I'm going to let my screen save, and then we're going to go over that. Now, if none of you haven't seen it already, go check out the stream labeled Understanding Clipping Masks, because for a lot of people, those things seem kind of confusing and don't know exactly what they're for. And since we're kind of working on this map right here, it's perfect. We can go ahead and put down a clipping mask right now, so that'll work out great. And I'll show you how to blend textures with a clipping mask. Excuse me, I'm sorry about that. You're going to want to go to your catalog, O key, F key, and just type in clip. And you're going to find there are two sets of clipping masks. There's a smooth edge, or a kind of a smooth hard edge. I don't know why it's called smooth edge, but this is a hard edge and this is a soft edge. Hard edges, when we're going to make a landslide. And if we're going to do a landslide, we're not going to use a hard edge. We're going to use a soft edge. And I'll show you first what a clipping mask is and what it does. So a clipping mask is basically just a stamp that has no line work, and it's going to pick up whatever is on the FG layer. You notice that these stamps also have clipping masks. These cliffs also have clipping masks baked into them, right? This is just a clipping mask without any stamp. So it's just a stamp clipping mask. And what it basically is used for is to hide things. I don't know what else really to use it for other than it just hide things, right? Now, if you want to show that like maybe there's a landslide and a part of this cliff face collapsed and it fell down, then you would put a clipping mask, boom, right over the cliff like that. And now you've got a little bit of the cliff has gone away, right? We put something on top of it. And then from there, we can start blending in textures. So again, it's on the FG layer. So if you want to paint that clipping mask, it has to be set to FG. Just click that one key when the brush tool is selected. And you'll see I'm painting right over it. Oopsie, with that wrong one, my bad. I'm just going to paint right over it. Same thing here, I'm going to paint right over it. So there I have that. I'm going to go back to my BG layer because that's where this is. I'm going to make sure that I have that texture all along here. So this is where that cliff, this is where the landslide took place. And of course, I'm going to want to put some rocks and stuff up on top. But a clipping mask is basically just something you use to hide stuff. Like you want to make a bridge, then you would piece two walls together and put a clipping mask underneath it. So that way you don't show a cliff, a river cliff, or a wall or whatever. So it's a way of hiding things that you don't want to show up. And that includes things like baked in shadows from the fantasy regional style, all that kind of stuff. So we're going to show a landslide here. I'm going to throw everything down like this. Clipping masks are hard for me in the fantasy regional because of stamps front and back nature. Yep. That can be difficult, just the way that the collision detection works in that style. Yeah, and you're working with isometric stamps, and it's hard to use a clipping mask with isometric stamps. It's actually easier with fantasy battle maps, at least in my opinion, though there are lots of use cases with clipping masks outside of the style. But yes, you can use them. And in the if you go check out the link that Cheryl that put in the chat, the clipping masks, I actually show how to use clipping masks with Fantasy Regional. We took a bunch of mesas and we grouped them all together to make like a platform, and it looked weird. And then we put clipping masks on top of the mesa to make a flat surface. So you have this nice flat mesa, and we get to paint the top of the mesa, the large cliff. We get to paint it. So that worked out really well. Let's go back first and add in these rocks. So I want to put some rocks to hide some of the line work on the edge here, of course. So I'll put one here. I want to put it on this edge. Oops, you got to put it on top, above the clipping mask, not below it. There we go. Clipping mask on top. There we go. And then from there, you're going to want to paint in. Basically, we're going to paint in the ruts and edges where this thing kind of fell off. So give me a second here to go to filters, bring the brightness down. Now, as you would expect with a landslide, you'd expect a slide. Well, I don't see any sliding marks. Do you see any marks representing slide? I don't. So why don't we do that? So we're going to create a series of, we go on the FG layer like this, and we're going to create a series of slides. That looks a little too dark, actually. Let's undo that, go to salt this down. There we go. 50 should work. Yeah, there we go. Let's try this. And I want to kind of create a sliding effect like this. So we'll have a slide. Maybe a big one fell down like this. And we're going to create this kind of slide effect that we're looking for. There we go. Now it kind of looks like something's kind of slid and fell down off of this building. There we go. Or not building, off of the cliff ledge. There we go. That looks all right. And you can even throw in different colors if you want to kind of break it up, like maybe even adding in a little bit of brown. Let's go a little higher up. But there we go. All right, just to show, because the color of the dirt is different underground than it is on the dirt on top of the ground. It depends on the soil. So I add in a little bit of dirt just to show that there's some soil built into the dirt, not just the stone texture that I have. So we have a nice slide there. Yeah. Well, I'll show you real quick, Joanne Reed, real quick, the way that you can use a clipping mask in Fantasy Regional HD. I just want to give a quick demo because this is actually a really cool trick that I've used to make a lot of different things. It's really useful. Yes, here we go. I'm excited. Okay, one sec here. I'm gonna go into Mesa. I'm gonna do this real quick, and I'll show you a real cool trick. And mesas are the best one to use because they have a flat surface on top, so they're perfect. Little off topic, don't mind me if I do this real quick trick. I'm gonna use this, I think I'm gonna use this big one right, where's that big one that has just a flat top to, there it is right there, perfect. Absolutely. Great pro tip, by the way. All right, I'm just gonna place a couple of these together real quick, just so I can kind of show you a cool trick that I have learned. Super cool trick. God, there's so many things I want to tell you and show you, but I can't do them all in one sitting. I can't do them all, unfortunately. I'd love to do them all in just one sitting. That'd be great. But dang, no. Okay, I'm going to put a bunch of these together. Let's do this. And then from there, you can put clipping masks on top of them. So I'm going to go ahead and put it on top, go up a layer. And you can put these on top to hide this, and you can repaint it. One second here. This is going to take a few seconds to do this because this takes a moment. And go in, pick the texture that I want. Just go with this one for now. It should be fine. Set it to FG and just paint it on. Boom, boom. Not really the right texture, really. It should be a different one. Let's go with the other dirt. Just want to show you some cool applications with it, so you can kind of use that. Lots of different tricks that you can do with clipping masks. They're extremely useful. Actually, I think I'm going to use the Fantasy Regional HD because that's the style that has what I'm looking for. One second while I find that. Where are you? There is an orange texture that's specifically built for that, I think. Let me put it down here. No, it should be a little bit oranger, I think. Make it a little bit more Orange, let's try that. Oh yeah, that's better. There we go. There we go. You can use clipping masks to create a large flat surface. Because one thing with Fantasy Regional is that sometimes you can't portray the depth that you want. I'm sure you've noticed that, where you're like, well, I want to show a huge cliff face. I want to show that. And sometimes it's really, really, really hard to show that depth. And so you can do this trick where you create like a first platform and then you add a second one on top like this. You can put one over here like this. And so you can keep building up. So make a large platform at the bottom with clipping masks, then make another smaller platform, clipping masks on top of that, and then stack more mesas on top of that. And so you'll really, really get some depth. And that is really, really helpful. I absolutely love using clipping masks. It's not just fantasy battle maps. Absolutely, they are functional in many, many ways. Again, if you haven't seen that clipping mask tutorial, I absolutely recommend it. I have at least a dozen or several use cases in there, and believe me, there is probably a lot more use cases. Is there any other questions before I go ahead and take my lunch? Feel free to ask. It doesn't have to be blending oriented. It could just be a random question about something else. I don't mind at all. I enjoy chatting with you all so much. So if you got some stuff, let me know. Awesome, yeah. It's so funny. I was making a map earlier and I just came up with some cool tricks that I want to show in another stream. First time chat, Pompikisi. I can't pronounce it. I apologize. Best followers, primes, and viewers on Mount Viewers. Oh, okay. Okay, let's take a look. All right, no other questions? Then I'll probably call it good. Just want you to know that I actually have some fun ideas for next month streams. I know that we have another 2 weeks left in the month. We do have that map makeover on Monday the 18th. We have that full editor demo on Wednesday. If you don't know how to use the editor and you're kind of a first time, you're a noob, just figuring things out, you should absolutely attend the Wednesday the 20th full editor demo. Well, I will be going over every single tool, every single feature, and how to use it with demos. And then the following day, the 21st, we'll be doing how to paint your parchment maps. So for those of you who like parchment maps and you want to paint them a certain style, we'll go over that. That means painting your mountains, because the parchment style has all the stamps have clipping masks on them, or a lot of them do, and that allows you to paint them. So we'll be doing that. I'm super excited about that. And then the last week of the month, we've got blacksmith shops and coastlines. But I think next month I'd love to show you guys how to make heraldry. Making heraldry is so much fun. We'll go over that. How to make maps with just colors, flat colors, no textures whatsoever, just flat colors, and then letting the filters do all the texture work for you. So I'm really excited about that. That will be a really fun stream. And then also probably streams on more parchment map stuff, and then also whatever new art that we're releasing. I know we're releasing some art this month. Woohoo, exciting. All right, well, since there's no other, Nymphodia, next Wednesday. Oh yeah, next Wednesday is going to be the full editor demo on the 20th. Don't miss that. Woo! I'm excited. We're going to have a great time. Yeah. Hey, and if you have any suggestions for future streams, go ahead and, ping me in Discord or mention it in chat. Now, also, we upload these videos immediately to YouTube right after the stream. So don't be afraid to go onto YouTube and then go ahead and leave in the comments below what kind of streams you want to see next. Can you give an hour? Yeah, 10 a.m. PST. I always do the streams every single time, 10 a.m. PST. So it's always the same. Yes, if it's going to be Eastern Standard Time, then it's going to be 1 p.m. for those of you who are on the East Coast in the United States, so New York and all those states, okay? All right, since there's no other questions, at least not that I know of, that's what we're going to be doing. I have been trying to make slimes for a slime village. I think, there are some slime stamps, or you can make your own with the path tool Oh my gosh, yeah. Path tool it's not really the path tool. It's kind of the Omni tool, but but it is labeled the path tool, so we'll call it that for now, okay? But yeah, making slimes is fun. Path tool for life. Yes, absolutely. Cheryl, you nailed it. I love it. Yeah, slime sounds awesome. It sounds like so much fun. I love making little slimy, gooey guys. All right. Well, hey, thank you, everybody. I had a great stream. Everyone's been so nice. Thank you, guys. I want you all to have a wonderful weekend. Please stay safe and healthy. And I will see you all hopefully on Monday, the 18th, next month. Again, enjoy your freaking weekends. I demand it. Do it immediately. Enjoy it. In fact, start it now. Enjoy your weekend right now. All right. Thank you, everybody. Please, again, stay safe and healthy, okay? I will see you next week.